We are indeed recording this session, and it's important to make people aware of that. So this is Buried in Treasure, chapter 4. As you may be aware, we are going through the chapters in the Buried in Treasure reference, and we're using that as a point of reference for really addressing challenges around hoarding and cluttering. We're really striving to support people addressing hoarding behaviors based on this particular guideline, this established reference evidence-based approach to addressing the hoarding behaviors. So thank you for joining us, and look forward to really having an engaging session. The subject matter is not simply one of significance, but it's very pivotal to how people recognize, take action in terms of both addressing and maintaining behaviors and interventions and approaches that allow them to get a handle on behaviors that are compromising as a consequence of cluttering and collection and hoarding, so to speak. So welcome. Today's meeting is hosted by DBHR through the Washington State Healthcare Authority. And as I mentioned earlier, this is an interactive session, and the hope is that you'll bring as much of your perspective as well as really see how it aligns with the guided interventions and approaches that have shown evidence of aiding and supporting someone in an effort to really manage their hoarding behaviors. Be reminded the slides and the recording will be sent to you subsequently. I'm hoping that you're getting them subsequent to each session. If not, please let me know. We'll do our best to share that information. I am joined by my colleague, Crystal Socia, who will be providing technical support here as well as guidance, and she will subsequently be integrated into this, so you'll have the pleasure of having Crystal as we move along. And Lexi's asking a quick question. The slide in this presentation, will it be available to us afterwards? Absolutely, it will be. And I'm going to ask Crystal as well if she could share the slides and the recording of the last session. So we'll try to do that if you haven't had the opportunity to get them so far. So please make us aware if you're not receiving them, we'll pass that on. So we certainly have a list of sessions that really cover the entire text that we're using. So we're at chapter 4, which is our third session, so to speak. We covered chapter 1 and 2 in our first session, chapter 3 last month, and this month is dedicated to meet the bad guys. So who are the bad guys, why they're so significant, what role they play in your efforts to really get a handle on managing cluttering and hoarding these behaviors. So Crystal kindly shared both the presentation and the recording of last session, so you'll have that for your references. But here is basically the guideline as to how the sessions are going to unfold throughout the year. So we do a little housekeeping. Obviously, we ask folks to be engaged using the chat. You have the option here of unmuting and speaking. I would ask that you indicate if you're going to do so that we never have a number of people speaking at the same time. And you have the option at the end of the session to download the chat. So all the chat information can be downloaded at the end of the session. You'll go to the 3 dots at the end of your bar, and it will give you the option of getting to the chat. I'll remind you at the end of the session how to do that so you can have that information. There's the call-in option as well. If you're having challenges with your audio, your video option, you can use the call-in option that allows you to do so via audio. And you have the option certainly of having your video on and off. I know for a number of folks, the office may not allow for that environment, but if you can, certainly it's a lot easier to engage with folks and really get a sense of how you're thinking, how you process by seeing your face. So thank you if you're able to do so. So we want to review, we want to take a look at what we've done so far, some of the homework, so to speak, that was given from last month's session. We looked at the challenges. We certainly want to review the challenges to addressing clutter, the level of insight, how do you gain insight, coping, and reinforcement. What I'm going to do, though, to make it a little easier, I hope, is I'm going to launch a poll and ask you to just respond to those poll questions. They're really part of the review process. So you can take a few seconds and just provide some feedback to the poll that would allow us to get a sense as to where things are and how you've reconciled the information so far. So if you can, quickly take a few seconds and just provide us some feedback to the polls. Let me know if you're able to see the polls. I don't want to be not aware if you aren't seeing the polls. Great, so it looks like folks are providing some feedback. Thank you. So we'll give another 10 seconds and then we'll look at the results of the poll and get a sense as to, once again, your feedback from last session. Bravo. So I will share the results and we'll just take a look. So the first question is, did you attend last month's session? And more than half of you said yes. So as you know, the hope is that people will be part of every session to really get the full element of the training and information, but it's not an absolute requirement. You can join at any point. For some people, specific subject matter may be of more significance to them, or maybe more applicable to their circumstances. So you certainly can join at any point. And that allows you to gain that information, and we'll be sharing the presentation and recording along the way. So if you attended, did you try the following assessments, resources, and equal amount of folks said they tried, is my home safe and my daily activities impaired? So those are two assessment resources that were very helpful in getting a sense as to the degree of the impairments and challenges in the home as a consequence of hoarding behaviors. So some folks haven't tried it yet. What I suggest certainly is to take the opportunity to do so. Really, Buried in Treasures as a learning community is really about taking that information and put it into practice and getting some sense as to how it applies in the field and how you're able to utilize the tools and resources available. So thank you all for providing that information. So number of folks that haven't tried these yet. Okay, that's fine, absolutely. If you don't have an answer for that question, that's absolutely fine. And if you can and you want to simply share in the chat, to share in the chat, and that would be absolutely fine. So we looked at really some of the assessment tools to get a sense as to the nature of the cluttering behavior or the nature of that person's perception of it. We talked as well about where people are in their sense of readiness to even acknowledge that their possessions or the extent of their possessions has become unmanageable or difficult to manage. And we talk about, certainly, when people are open to discussions, we take certain approaches. Those approaches are more about building those therapeutic relationships and really helping people to gain a better understanding as to the impact of clutter on their lives. And certainly we know if someone is not there in terms of readiness, don't acknowledge, don't have that sense of awareness as to the extent of the challenge with possessions or hoarding behaviors, then we are more focused on harm reduction efforts, really trying to keep them in their homes by adhering to lease guidelines or policy guidelines as it relates to ensuring that there's an exit and egress and it's safe to get in and out of it, to have emergency personnel be able to access that, to maybe pass a home inspection, to just make sure that people are safe in their homes and have access and at least have some sense of utility in their living environment. So it's important to assess where that person is in terms of their awareness and readiness to even acknowledge or address the concerns of hoarding. So we certainly, I would like if someone can certainly share with me if you have the opportunity, if you have tried one of those resources, certainly I'd like to get a sense as to how did it go? What did you try? What was the response? Anyone willing? And you certainly have the option of sharing both in the chat, or you can unmute and share. And don't be shy, I don't bite. And I know particularly from experience, both with the previous cohort and from other folks that we've worked with, typically when people are trying an initial assessment tool, the first major challenge is really even getting that person to look at that tool or that assessment approach as even something that they want information from. You know, it's that concept of, if I don't acknowledge there's an issue, then there isn't an issue. So oftentimes the challenge is, how do you even begin to have that conversation and then really allow that person to be aware that the assessment tool is not going to be used as a judgment instrument, but more to bring some awareness, you know, for that person to begin to even question or explore their relationship to their possessions. So oftentimes it's really, Earl, where do I even interject with an assessment tool? You know, how do I even get that into a conversation when I'm just about building some trust here? It's similar to what I said. You certainly can tell people up front quite clearly, listen, this is a very difficult part in that process. When we go from just having the conversations, but how can I help you, to really establishing steps to helping you, or steps for you to even derive some level of awareness as to whether or not you need help or are willing to engage in the process of getting some help to address your concerns. And we'll talk some more about how do you really establish that path to utilizing a tool that is going to provide some feedback or information for that person to then determine whether or not they want to use it. You can certainly establish, as well as the information or the insight we gain from this assessment is still one that you can choose to use or not. There is no mandate that if the assessment indicates that you know there's some level of a lack of control here about how you manage your situation, you still have the prerogative to say, I don't want to address it. So that's important to gain that level of awareness as well. So what are we going to be focused on today? Really identifying bad guys that derail our efforts to address hoarding behaviors. We're talking about mindset, thought patterns, behaviors, ways of thinking that undermines efforts to move in the direction of change. And we also are looking at identifying and evaluating tools, assessment tools, to determine the presence of bad guys in that person's environment. And how do we then deal with it? So we'll really look at what are the thinking patterns, the ways of being, the ways of engaging in their own life that really undermines effort to really create a space that is livable, free of encumbrance, and really addresses both the physical environment and the emotional concept that attaches to that physical way of living. So it's important to note we're really looking at the bad guys today. And that is the reason why we call them bad guys. It's like, Earl, if I talk about bad guys with someone, it's going to be a tough conversation to have. The reality is when we give it that name, we allow that person to really have some separation from that element and really look at it in that way. It's not who you are, it's really how you present yourself in that realm, and that can change. And Erin says the conversation has happened, medication has even been prescribed regarding underlying condition contributing to the hoarding. A counselor is involved. It's the next steps and being consistent with those steps that are at issue. Falling back into old habits is a regular occurrence. Absolutely. And I can tell you, and I think we started out by saying that, and I think Chris can attest to that. This is not easy. Anyone who tells you trying to help someone mitigate or moderate hoarding behavior is an easy task, that's a fool's journey. It's not an easy one, but it's attainable. We've had significant success. We've seen people really take charge of their circumstances, so it works. But it's not easy. There's no indications at all that it's easy. And I'm never going to sell you that yarn. I'm not going to tell you that at all. So there's a purpose for meeting the bad guys, and it's important to know that. Because what we find is that so oftentimes people get self-help books, get professional organizers, use all kinds of approaches, watch videos as to how to store their stuff effectively and organize their stuff well. And yet there's been a number of failures of really changing the behavior and maintaining it. And there's been a lot of botched efforts at benefiting from plans that are just quick fixes, or I'm going to make you change your behavior by doing A, B, C, D, as opposed to garnering, fostering that person's internal motivation to recognize that this is not the way they want to function. This is not the way they want to utilize their homes, and to really address that situation from the standpoint of, I see a need for a change. I am going to be committed to making that change and sustaining that change because I can see the quality of life and other benefits consequential to making that change. And that's important. No one is going to change their behavior particularly unless their way of seeing the world and operating in the world and thinking and processing and feeling changes. So in essence, there's psychological factors that we're addressing, mindset, so ways of thinking that are referred to as bad guys. And in this chapter, we're going to become acquainted with 5 bad guys. What I know for a fact is that if you've had a hoarding issues with hoarding, or you've dealt with some of it, hoarding disorder, you'll probably recognize some of these bad guys because they may already exist in that person's life and prevailing as an obstacle to recovery. So there's likely that they'll be familiar. In your experience, you just think of it from the sense of, how can people really address hoarding behaviors without taking a look at the ways of thinking that is impeding the way they behave? Very seldom is there a path where it doesn't intersect with a person's way of thinking. It doesn't really hone in on that. So it's important to note we're trying to change the way people think, feel, and behave. What prevents people from benefiting from efforts to organize or discard? I mean, from your personal experience or from other experiences, what have you seen as being the major problem for people? Anxiety, says Christy. Absolutely. Oftentimes, that all-encompassing anxiety can really challenge people in terms of really maintaining a life that is organized in many regards. Emotional attachment to memories the item evokes. Absolutely, Sydney. So there's lots of, once again, we're talking here entirely about ways of thinking, if you notice. Very rarely we're really looking only at a behavior. We're looking at that connection, that link, thoughts and behaviors. Executive functioning problems, in some instances, fear of letting go, trauma, loss, inability to cope, avoidant coping, lots of underlying reasons. So the goals of essentially of meeting the bad guys is to get that information using self-assessment, to see barriers coming, build up resources to counteract them. Basically, it's to take a conscientious look at the way people engage in a thought process that impacts their behavior and determine whether or not they're meeting their needs with that same way of thinking, which impacts the way of behaving. So really looking at the underlying currents that impacts one's current behavior. Why what makes you feel so attached to this particular item that you feel you can't do without it? What makes you collect 10 of the same items? And understanding that, yes, each one has utility, but holding on to 10 does not, create a greater sense of power or commitment to utilizing it. So we have to have that clear understanding. So let's introduce the bad guys. There's 5 of them we're going to look at concretely today. It's just not my priority. When someone does not make addressing hoarding behavior their priority, they put it off, it's otherwise, it's seconded to some other level of priority. Let unhelpful beliefs get in your way. And that's what we were talking about. That's unhealthy connection to something, or a really distorted sense of its value. Really looking at those elements. Overthinking or confusing yourself. We think of 15 ways of packing this particular item. I want to have all my Bank of America receipts in one drawer, and then the other bank, and we have 4 different, and before you know it, you get immobilized by the many different ways you think of packing and selecting and storing. Excuse making and avoidance. It's not such a problem. I'll get back to it tomorrow. Maybe, if I don't look at it the way I need to look at it, it's not so bad. I can push it in the corner. Maybe if I just have them in the kitchen, no one would know that my hoarding is out of control. There's lots of ways of doing that. And going for short-term payoff. When people look at the quick fixes or short-term responses to a significant prevailing issue. So those are some of the bad guys. We'll look at them individually. So when we speak to, it's just not my priority. Bad guy number 1. We're really taking a conscientious look of that person being not aware or partially aware and not looking at certain areas. Because when you think of it, regardless of if the bad guys, what form they take, reducing awareness and not making control of hoarding priority for people's readiness to change is going to be a major problem. If you don't recognize it as a priority and it's a major problem, then it's likely that the state will not change. People's readiness to change is going to be an important assessment that you're going to have to help that person make and support that person making. What we know is that when reasons for change outweigh the reasons for not changing, it's the only time people make change. People have to find substantial, overwhelming, unanimous reasons for making a change as opposed to not making a change in order to take some action. And very few people change 1 minute before they come to that awareness. And that's important to note. No one is going to change before they feel ready and they see overwhelming benefit to changing. So the reasons for changing has to surpass the reason for staying status quo. Otherwise, you're basically forcing a change upon a person who's not ready. So some of the excuses or some of the rationalizations you'll hear, it's not that bad. I don't see what the big fuss is about. You know, my house may be messy, but whose is it? Have you heard those? Have you heard those comments from someone who you look at their surroundings and their environment and there's a gasp that you want to have, or you want to say something and you have to be so conscientious, but yet that's the statements you're hearing. Is that familiar to you? That someone says, it's not that bad. Or he says, yes, especially when living alone and it's not bothering anyone else. I agree, particularly when no one else is tuning in on a perspective. It's easy to, come up with your own perspective about the degree of the problem, or even if there is a problem. What about my house is messy, or it may appear messy, but whose house is not messy? Or Christy says, I don't have the space to organize. I will get back to it. Absolutely. But Hannah says, not necessarily about clutter, but I have a client say, I know my apartment is dirty and won't pass inspection, but I don't really care to clean it because it doesn't bother me. I don't need to be a cleaner. Yes. And you've heard that in other aspects of life. Think of how many other areas of life that particular rationalization has been used, and used very well, to be quite honest with you. Used successfully for a lot of people. Some folks have made it very clear, I don't have a hoarding problem unless I'm getting the eviction notice for hoarding. And Erin says, I forgot about it and I don't think about it. Yes. We're all conditioned in many ways to protect our sense of who we are and our ego, in the sense that it's easy to say, it's not such a problem. You're just, exaggerating this situation. What if I have, 5 mattresses in the bedroom? At some point, I'm going to use one, 2 of them. I'm just keeping them there. They belong to my cousin. My aunt bought that one. That was the first one she bought. That was a wedding gift. And you hear a litany of explanations. And some of them are very plausible. And you can see genuine authenticity in that person's voice, tone, and meaning. So it's not as though they're trying to deceive you. They're telling you exactly how they feel in that moment. But it was on sale, absolutely. Lots of reasons. So the person can be aware of a problem as well. Be like, listen, Elizabeth, I know I have a problem. You're not the first person who told me I have a hoarding problem. Right? And I don't really feel good about it, but it's not really a priority. I've got to pay my bills. I've got, these 4 cats I have to feed. I have lots of other things, I have to deal with this drug problem. I have my mental health issues. I have to deal with my diabetes. I have to deal with nobody loving me. Nobody's coming around. Hoarding is the last thing I want to deal with because I know that's going to take a lot of work. It's overwhelming. I don't even want to start. And Hannah says, you get a lot of, I'm just lazy. Oh, that's a great one. Because when you tell someone, I'm just lazy, you're basically saying to that person, you will never be able to motivate me. I have no desire to change, and I'm comfortable with my circumstance. That's kind of that's a big wall to try to jump over. So there's elements and approaches to addressing that without really feeling defeated. You can certainly acknowledge, well, listen, I know a number of people who felt they were lazy at one moment. And as they saw the need to have their housing become more and more a priority, they really begin to address their way of collecting things. So it's possible. You can be lazy and still potentially make some changes. So there's lots of ways of taking that approach. And Alexis says sometimes the buying is subconscious and impulsive from trauma. Yes, lots of reasons for collecting stuff to the point where it becomes an issue. And decluttering for some people can simply become a low priority for fear of failure, for fear of admitting that they have a problem, numbers of reasons. So we'll go through some of them. But this is important to recognize. This is a major number one bad guy. It's just not a priority. And sometimes it's a rationalization. Sometimes it's an avoidant way of coping to, say, I don't want to deal with it and you're not going to talk about it again. So if you're going to come to my house to provide case management, don't tell me about hoarding. How dare you even tell me about my place? Lots of ways of really keeping people out of the scope of acknowledging or giving them feedback about their observation. So it's important to recognize that when someone is here, you have to recognize it's more than just bad behavior or aberrant behavior or laziness. Oftentimes, this may be a way of thinking that has not been challenged before and hasn't been actually evaluated to determine its effectiveness. So you have to start in a place of really getting into a trusting relationship to that person to even begin to open the doors for having a discussion about why you think you are behaving this way. Why do you think this is a situation where you don't have control? And do you need to take better control? Do you need to change this? Why would you change this? What would be the benefit of changing? What would be the benefit of it staying the same? Really having that kind of discourse. So as I said before, until people recognizes the reasons for change outweigh those of not changing, change is not going to happen. You can scream and holler and ring a bell and make noise. It's not going to happen. You have to really challenge that area. So there's a balance of change that is important for us to be aware of and acknowledge. Reasons for not changing can be substantial. People can talk about they're perfectly happy the way things are. I just have to, take 2 steps back and then leap over that pile of junk in the kitchen, but I can do that. It keeps me fit. People can come up with all kinds of reasons for stuff, right? I'm not giving in to those people who keep nagging me about how dirty my place is or how much I'm collecting. They're just jealous. They wish they had the ability to collect stuff, or people care enough about them to give them stuff. All kinds of explanations you hear. Or simply acknowledging that there's a problem and you haven't done anything about it can make you feel so bad, so embarrassed, so ashamed that you don't want to deal with it. So there's numbers of ways people explain why they haven't even acknowledged a need to change or efforts to make a change. On the other hand, you can look at the balance where people have reasons for change. I want to get my life under control. All this clutter isn't safe for me. The last time I had a medical emergency, it took them 5 extra minutes or 10 extra minutes to get to me to provide first aid. Or I just find myself spending and collecting stuff and my finances are out of control. Now I can't pay my rent. I need help. I know just acquiring stuff is not helping me financially. Or I feel bad about myself. I feel bad I can't have my desired company over because they're going to look at my house and turn up their nose, or my house smells, or people make comments about the way I keep my house. The 40 figurines I have in the living room is no longer a fashion statement. It's no longer a declaration, a way of decorating. It's just I don't know where to put them anymore. And I've lost track as to what was the meaning of any one of them. Now I have 45 ways of looking at it. So it's important to understand the balance of change. So even when you begin to work with that person, a good way of approaching it is to say, listen, I noticed you've made this change. Think of what could have been a reason for you not making it, and give that person a sense that they've accomplished something. Because it's easy to not make a change. It's a lot easier. So any questions there about the balance of change and the reasons for change and the understanding that people have to be ready to change? And therefore, sometimes you have to challenge some of those rationalizations or reasons for staying the same, as opposed to sometimes just giving people some insight as to what they're saying. Is that clear? Do you understand that there's that balance? You always have to look at it from that dichotomy of reasons for change as opposed to not having reasons for change, and looking to see where the pendulum is either swinging or the weight is greater. If there's a greater list of reasons for change, people are oftentimes more motivated to at least acknowledge that there's a possibility of change. Because I know for in my own experience, I think of Earl more often than not. You have more shoes than the days of the week. But I can tell you there's a long list of good explanations. I come from a long line of shoe lovers. I have to honor them. They'd be ashamed of me if they don't think I'm wearing proper shoes, right? I like the outdoors, so I have to have 4 hiking shoes. I mean, one of them may not fit, but I like the color. Maybe one day my foot would actually fit into it. And believe you me, I say these things to myself, and they sound fabulous. They sound. I'd be aghast if someone says, Earl, that's some BS. That'll make no sense. You have a size 8.5 shoes and you wear size 10s. What are you talking about? I'd probably get a little alarmed if someone says that to me, but I can also understand if someone says, well, Earl, I really love your collection of shoes, but wouldn't you think someone else who may not have any at all can benefit if you offer them and share and be benevolent? The shoes that really you take pride in. Imagine if someone is wearing it who doesn't have any at all or love it. I can take that in for a moment. So that's what we talk about. It's not the assumption that the person is behaving this way because they know better, they're just not doing better. There's lots of gray matter in between now. So here is an assessment tool that we often use that really helps that person have some insight for themselves so they don't feel that you're imposing change on them. Are you ready to change? I notice the question is not whether or not you should, it's are you ready? And the questions really lend itself to that person taking some time to process, Person may say, as far as I'm concerned, I don't have a hoarding problem, don't need to change. Or they can get to the point where I'm doing something about it. So there's really, people may be in a different stage of readiness. And really acknowledging that, seeing it may allow you a platform from which you can begin to have some discourse. So this tool is also available to you, and it's a really fabulous one that is non-threatening and also really allows that person to have some internal insight. So what you will notice that it has a key that really gives you a sense of if items 7 and 8, this is, keep rolling the ball, keep kind of moving things along. The person is making significant progress. So there's a way of really looking at it and conscientiously seeing where that person is. Bad boy, bad guy number 2. Letting unhelpful beliefs get in your way. As I just said to you, I have some very unhelpful, unhealthy beliefs about certain things, and they got in the way. And typically for a number of people, they do. Beliefs about usefulness of something, right? If I've collected 5 shovels, but I don't have a yard, I do no gardening, does that make the shovels less valuable to me automatically? Think of that for a moment. If I have 5 shovels but no yard, don't do any gardening, can you honestly just walk up to me and say, Earl, you have no reasons to have 4 shovels? Because what you don't know. You don't know what my sense or my thought about this usefulness. I'd be like, listen, I can sell those shovels. I've gone to Home Depot and see when they're out of shovels, maybe I can make a big bargain. There's lots of reasons for me to hold on to 4 shovels. Maybe my goal 10 years from now is to buy a house with a yard, and I'll put up my fence using my shovel. And I want to keep them around. I don't want to buy an expensive shovel when it's inflation 10 years from now. I can hold on to a shovel for 10 years. So there's a number of ways of people really developing belief systems that keep them where they are. Maybe perfectionism from fear of making a mistake. Think of it. If the person is collecting all their mail, right? And they're trying to organize their mails in ways that their mind's eyes operate. Like, okay, I keep my bank statements in the left drawer. I keep the landscaping bill in this drawer, and someone come and just disorganize that. Then it takes a long time for that person to reorganize. Or simply, the person's like, if I even determine where to put this bill, I may make a mistake. I may put actually the Bank of America bill in the landscape drawer and get confused. And then when I'm trying to pull it out, it just annoys me. So maybe I'll just try to figure out the perfect system so I don't make a mistake. And we all know, how long does it take to get to perfection? Forever. Yes, Christina, forever. But there's some folks who believe at some point I'm going to get there. You know, I have the perfect system. Matter of fact, I saw it on YouTube. That Martha Strout lady had the perfect system. If she can do it, so can I. How dare I? Matter of fact, I know a friend named Stuart that has done it very well, just as well. So there's lots of reasons for doing so, right? Our attachment to possessions. This stuff I got the first time I went to the beach. I got this shell, then I found a box next to this shell. I knew it has some significance. I just haven't done the research to figure out whether it's worth $15 million, right? I am just processing it. So I put it in this corner, and the next time I go to the beach, there was a shell that looked exactly the same next to it, and before you know it, half your bedroom has collections from the beach. But you have not yet gone on Google to kind of look at the collectors and figure out how much it costs, but you'll get around to that, right? Maybe in November, when I take that break, I'll go through them and figure it out. Never happens. November comes, then another November comes, and you're on the November to remember before you can make a move. Or underestimating your memory. I need to have all these things available to me, because if I put them someplace and organize them well, I may forget where I put it. So I want to put everything on this desk, because this is the desk I come to do my bills. And what happens to that desk? The pile gets like this. And then you can't remember what's under the pile, what's in the middle of the pile, and nothing happens. Or you have that belief about control. I need to make sure I know where everything in my house is. I can't afford to organize things in a way where I need to call some, figure out where this is. No. Let me make sure I have it within my eyesight. So in my bedroom, I need to have everything available to me. When I wake up, if I wake up in the night and I get a good idea, I want to have my sketchbook and my notepad and my laptop and my stuff and maybe the phone and maybe the old, and before you know it, there's a pile in your bedroom. And you lose control of all that stuff. So why I'm giving you these analogies is because sometimes when we step into a person's environment and see it cluttered, we think that that person just collected stuff, knowing fully well it's going to make that clutter. No, these things can take a long time. And they start out with good intentions and great reasoning and just got out of control. The person don't wake up one day and get out of control. It takes a long time to get there. So it's important to know that. Feelings about items become so intense and inflexible and unhelpful to people, right? Everything has a historical, familial culture. Listen, there are folks who been collecting American Indian stuff because somewhere when they did the DNA, what do you not the DNA, what do you ancestral stuff, it said you had 1% Cherokee. So I am going on a Cherokee collecting stuff because I have to connect with all my ancestors, right? So I have 15 dream chases that I got from every state that I visit. And before you know it, I have to find a special box for my gene chase because I don't want my ancestor spirits coming and annoying me if I have all these things not properly stored. What happens? Before you know it, you have 15 boxes of dream chases and you don't know which one is where because you can't trust your memory anymore. And then you start taking them out. I'm just going to put them on my desk and hang them up because that's the only way I can see them. And that's how it gets out of control. So-and-so be mad at me if I get rid of this thing they gave me years ago. Yes, that niece that hasn't talked to me in 15 years, that stuff she gave me, though, that dresses she gave me, whenever she decides that she's going to, come back into my life, I need to have that there to show that I didn't forget her in these 15 years, even though she hasn't spoken to me in 15 years. And call me the devil's spawn and all that stuff. I'm going to hold on to this dresser because at some point when she gets herself, when she comes to her good mind, she'll realize how valuable she ought to me. I kept this dresser. And every niece that you have, you keep a dresser. What happens eventually? Oh, you'll become like Raymore and Flanagan or one of the other furniture stores. You have a collection that unfortunately you can't sell, but it's a lot of connection. So it's important to understand that. So it's important to ask and really have that person examine what they believe. Do you think you use this possession? Should you keep it? Do I really need it? If I make a mistake, could the results be disaster? Can I really not have the bill when I need it? Because I stored it in a place, now I forgot where I stored it, or I don't know whether it's the Bank of America or Wells Fargo or Chase or Citibank. I don't know which drawer is the Chase Bank anymore. Because I have these 4 dresses for my nieces. I don't know which one I put the stuff in. So I'll just take them all out. I'll just move the dresses in a corner, then I'll put the bills and stack them up. Before you know it, that's where we are. So this really helps. Over the last week, what are thoughts when thinking or throwing away something? Help somebody make a decision in a short time so that impulsive collecting and holding on to stuff does not become a major issue at that point. Some people can handle it, some can't. So it's important to understand this may work for some people, it may not. Because people have convinced themselves that the way they think about it and believe about and connect with this stuff is important to maintain. But you have to try it out. What does these questions make you think? What brings up? What it conjures up? What is your response to a specific category? So you have to think about the usefulness of it, right? Do you really need 4 shovels? Even if a shovel is expensive. No, because in 10 years, they may have an electronic shovel or a shovel that shovels for you. You may not need the wood handle one, right? Because if we never thought that there was going to be electric cars and we hold on to the 1940s cars, think what would happen. We'll all have yards of old cars that can't drive. So you have to think of it. Evolution, science, the change of things. Sometimes we have to let go, not just to give up, but to step into, today, step into the thoughts of tomorrow. We have to move in that direction. But that takes time, it takes process. Really understanding that you're not losing by, ridding yourself of something. Oftentimes you're gaining by removing something instead of giving yourself an opportunity to process things differently. So normally we'll take the break here, but I sense that we're in a good rhythm. Would it be okay for us to just continue? All right. So number 3, bad guy number 3, overthinking or confusing yourself. And you will probably think, Earl, that don't make any sense. It will in the moment. I guarantee it will make sense for you in the moment. Because can you really overthink, confuse yourself? Yes. When trying to sort and organize or discard things, there are three common pitfalls, and that's where people confuse themselves. Because people with hoarding behaviors often run into trouble because there's a penchant for being over creative and thinking more and more about an object or a way of storing it or a way of organizing it or a way of using it, that it becomes overthinking about the consequences of their actions, of making a decision. Is the item really needed, and is there space to store it? That can be a problem in that sense. So what are the three common pitfalls? Over-categorizing, cumbersome process, and creative use of ideas. So when we think of over-categorizing, it's what I was referring to when I think of, do you really need different drawers for every single bank statement you have? Or aren't they all in one category called what? Banking statements, right? Banking information. You actually can go into a drawer and separate the Bank of America from the Wells Fargo. It's not going to, you're not going to die if they're not in the same space. You can actually filter through it. So it's important to know that, right? People get so complex organizing. I'll tell you, people who hoard are some of the most creative thinkers. They are. You'd be surprised. It seems antithetical, right? Like, no, they seem to not have that creative thinking because they're just pushing everything into one space. You'd be surprised at the rate of creativity that creates the problem. Because sometimes trying to figure out things in the perfect category can become so overwhelming that it either immobilizes people or creates a problem where people just put them all in a space they can see them because they don't know how to categorize them after trying for 15 months. Or lose attention and focus because it just becomes too overwhelming to process all those categories. So that's important to know. So when we talk about cumbersome processes, elaborate process for getting rid of things, instead of just taking the stuff that has the number for recycling and put it in the recycling bin, there's instances where people are like, no, bottles have to go and cans have to go. And before you know it, there's 4 recycling bins in the kitchen, as opposed to just putting it out in the recycling bin outside. And there's a sense of perfectionism also that can be problematic. I want to do every single thing that the recycling company told me to do, which means I can't make a mistake, which means if this plastic bottle is number 5 as opposed to number 4, and I screw this up, I would have wasted, I'd kill all the seals in the ocean, all the elephants, and you can get to that point where that kind of fear creates a problem where you can't even process things. Because you think of 5 steps ahead as opposed to just where you are in that moment. You don't have a sense of mindfulness to make things happen in the moment. And the creative ideas people often use. Think of more and more uses of an object. I talked about the 4 shovels. People can think of, I've gone into places and the person has, and don't you dare laugh at this, 6 pencil sharpeners. And I see the look on your face like, people still have pencil sharpeners? Absolutely they do, right? Because he started doing some art projects 3 months ago, realized the pencil sharp, he needs a number 2 or number 6 pencils, got a 1 pencil sharpener, went to another garage sale and found an antique one, bought another one, then realized that the antique one wasn't working, it needed a part. So he bought a broken one to fix the part with the antique one. And before you know it, you have 6 pencil sharpeners. And then the art project got dropped to the wayside. So guess what happened? There's no need for those anymore. But no, I'm going to resume my art project in August, so I'm not getting rid of these. How dare you ask me to do that? You disrespect my leisure and my artistic self. You can't do that. So there's lots of ways people kind of hold on to things, right? Clever ideas fade and clutter remains. All that great way of, I'm going to go to, what's the place that you buy those stuff and they have to put them together? It's the big blue store, the blue and yellow store. I cannot remember it from my mind's eye now. Someone help me. IKEA. Yes, the IKEA projects, right? Person goes to IKEA and says, I'm going to go get this stuff that has 15 compartments. You put them together and I'll have all my letters and all my magazines and all my stuff in the perfect stuff. I can look across the room and see them. And guess what happens with the IKEA stuff? It never gets put together. So the IKEA box gets put on the project, then on the mails, and before you know it, and then by the time they're ready to fix the IKEA stuff, they realize that, I don't know if they have all the parts. So let me go buy another IKEA stuff because it's a better one. There's one with 12 compartments as opposed to 10. And that's what happened. And it all started with good intentions. No one ever wake up one day and says, I will become a hoarder. I've never heard a story of that sort. If you have, please let me know. Do you overthink? Once again, we're looking within a short period of time. Last week, if you decide whether or not to throw something away and really check and process your way of thinking and reviewing things in that concept. Can I think of a lot of ways of using it? Disposing of this will take a lot of steps. We talk about the recycling stuff. Do you actually need to go through every can when it's a can? Probably not. Now, there's people that I know that will actually say, Earl, you are so out of sorts. How dare you not go to each can and look at the number? They're numbers, they're different numbers that you should really put it in. I have one recycling can. But I've seen people who have one recycling can and they have different bags because different bags need to have things. Cellophane needs to go in this needs to go in that gets to go in that. And before you know it, it's stuck in the kitchen because it never gets to the can. Because you're in the kitchen trying to figure it out all night that you can't put it in the can. Then the day passes for recycling, and guess what happens? Kitchen gets another set of them because I'm going to ting them on Thursday. And then another Thursday passes because I can't get out of the house. And before you know it, recycling takes over the kitchen. Very simple ways things get accumulated. So you have to really assess whether there's over creativity in the way you process things. Is there a simpler way? Is there a less cumbersome process for really sorting and discarding stuff? And we'll talk at length about that when we get into the actual implementation phase. Tremendously simple but challenging ways of just processing things to categorize. You would be shocked how many categories there are of t-shirts that people have to actually figure out before they put one away. Oh, you didn't know that? There's sports t-shirts. There's my t-shirts from the 60s. There's my t-shirts from school. But there's lots of t-shirts. T-shirts of all varieties. There's like 100 categories of t-shirts. Some people are focused on categorizing. A t-shirt isn't just a t-shirt. Excuse making and avoidance. Gym t-shirts, sleep t-shirts, absolutely. Whole t-shirts with hole, t-shirts with tears. T-shirts with faded, t-shirts that are, lots of different t-shirts. Fear and anxiety are normal responses to stress, but people with hoarding disorder tend to have that exacerbated in many regards, right? And hence the challenge. Avoidance might be the deadliest of the bad guys. So number 4 is one you have to hold on, keep really in your mind's eye. Discarding items can bring up anxiety and sadness, and in many of us. But for some people, those powerful feelings can be so intolerable and aversive that they would go to great lengths to avoid those behaviors. People would do anything not to have to experience those behaviors. And that leads to inaction oftentimes. So it's important to know. Low distress tolerance can be a profound obstacle in that sense. Low threshold to feel overwhelmed. People feel overwhelmed quickly. And that impacts one's ability to feel ready or committed to making a change. And this kind of avoidance often worsens hoarding behavior. Because think of it, folks are worried about paying the bills to stop going through the mail. Excuse making and avoidance. I can't do this now. I'm too tired and stressed out, and a long list of this. I'll do this when I feel better, right? Just thinking of my kitchen gives me a headache. Why would I want to do anything about that when I'm going to be imposing a headache on myself just thinking about it? So let me wait until my headache goes away, and I'll think about it, and I'll get back to doing something. And then every time I think of it, I get a headache, so I don't take any action. What are some of the types of avoidance or avoidant behavior you see, particularly with clients that you have, or folks that you have, or loved one that you have who have a hoarding problem? What are some of the avoidant behaviors? I'll sort this out when I get into my new apartment. Absolutely. Or when I get a bigger place, I wouldn't have to get rid of my possessions that I love so much. Right? How dare you say that stuff is out of style? Bell bottoms is coming back in. The 14 bell bottom pants that I have, they'll fit me as soon as I get that weight loss program together. Come on now. You know it. Let's be real about it. Right? It can all go into the storage unit. Yes. Matter of fact, my niece that loves me so much and admire me for all my antiques, she gave me a gift of a storage unit. Now it sounds odd, right? Like somebody's enabling this person, but it's love. Misguided love. So it's not just the person you did it. Sometimes it's the circle and all the influences in their life. Or changing the subject completely, right? Kristen was like, yeah, why are you talking about hoarding? Don't you, what about your kids? The clients that certainly turn on you and be like, girl, how is your son doing? And you're sitting there thinking, did I ever tell her I had a son? Yeah, she was already looking for a way of kind of a subject matter that can get you off track. So yes, she read it in your eyes or somewhere. Or she says, oh, girl, I know how tough this case management work has always been. I don't know how you guys do it. Listen, they got other people who has greater needs than I. Don't bother with me. I'm okay. I'm an old girl living in this house. These things are not bothering me. Go help one of those people with drug abuse. What? Don't worry about me. These are excuses that I've heard. I'm sure you've come across them. Or someone saying, you telling me that I have a problem makes them a bad person. Why are you trying to insult me? Why are you trying to belittle me? So there's lots of ways of coming at you. So you've got to be conscientious of that. And that's just as much avoidant excuse making. It doesn't have to be about that person accepting they're the problem. They can point at you. Right? You talk about my house being cluttered and dirty. You just walked right into my house and didn't take your shoes off. How do I know you're not bringing germs into my house? But yet you're talking about, the corned beef that I had there that is growing some mold. What's wrong with that? I'm going to use that, I want to use that can. That can makes a good pot for my daisies. Oh, you haven't seen the coffee can plant pot? Oh, yes. I've seen the Folgers, every possible coffee pot has become a plant pot that they're going to use, right? But in the backyard, it's overgrown. The plants are dead, but we're going to use that plant pot whenever I get to planting my tulips again. It happens. And so it's important to really look at the avoidant behavior, the excuse making. And if you are safe and have that trusting relationship enough, you really can challenge it directly or use a tool of this nature to really help that person take a look at it for themselves. And you really kind of just helping them stay on track. You know, I can't stand the possibility of feeling bad or putting it out. So I don't throw away this stuff. And then you ask yourself, how many times have you tried and hasn't been successful? Oh, I haven't really tried. That's why they piled up by the door. Would you want to take, give it a shot? I'm here to support you. You don't have to feel alone in doing this. And if you don't feel well, you can actually put it right next to the door. But start that process. Ashley says, I tried to help a friend do some cleaning this past weekend, and it was really hard. She was paralyzed to throw anything away, even obvious garbage. And Ashley, thanks you for sharing that. I'll tell you two things immediately. What is the two things you can immediately observe from Ashley's statement? From what we've talked about so far. And I'll give you two words to look at in that statement. Garbage is number one. Because garbage is what? It's your perception of the item, right? There you go. And throwing it away. Not that person making a decision to discard it, it's throwing it away. When someone says the term throwing it away, what automatically comes to your mind? Do you feel like you have a choice when someone says throwing it away? And actually, this is not a judgment on you. This is not assessing your statement. I'm just telling you, that's how we look at things. Because I've heard this very often. I've tried helping that person, the person is paralyzed by throwing away things that are obviously have no value. And sometimes with good intentions and with great mindset, we're thinking the wrong way. We're like, I can take that same statement and you will eventually be able to do that by saying that statement and say, the person, despite all my efforts, was not ready to do what? Make the decision to remove something from their possession. Same statement, same facts, different perception. Absolutely, Ashley, and I apologize for using your statement as stuff. I didn't want you to feel that you did anything wrong. You did absolutely the right thing. We all do that, right? Because yes, moldy food, it can have 2 rats and a squirrel on top of it. That person may still have a different way of describing it, right? It's my sandwich that I didn't eat, as opposed to it's a moldy, rotten piece of whatever. Very, very different. Perception starts with the person's way of articulating their attachment, connection, or relationship to that item. Understand that very clearly. And I don't care how articulate you are and how skillful you are, unless that person gives you permission to say that's what it is, that doesn't work. But great way of looking at it. Lovely, and I love that, Ashley. She says, I thanked her for trusting me enough to invite me into her home. Fantastic. I told her I was coming into her home with love and non-judgment, and I only wanted to help her at her pace. Ashley, I want to borrow that statement because that's exactly the way you approach it. That's exactly the way you articulate it and put it into space. What we learn is that you can have the best approach, strategy, intentions, and everything else. And guess what? If that person is not ready to move in the left or right, nothing happening. Hence hoarding. Hence why I said this is not for the faint of heart. Finally, we look at going for short-term payoff. And if anyone on this panel or anyone in this part says they have never ever gone for the short-term payoff, I'll tell you quite honestly and unequivocally that you're not being fully truthful. Notice my choice of words, right? Because nobody's going to hold me. Call it, you're not being honest about it. We've all gone for the short-term payoff. All right. It's just the nature of human beings. Who wants to hurt and work hard when you have a shortcut? It's the nature of how things are. I like that Chris says, heck yeah. So I got permission to say heck yeah. Absolutely. It's just the nature of things. Feeling happy from acquiring or keeping things often becomes a major problem for folks. They view items as treasures or bargains, right? My goodness, I waited. I never thought this item was going to be on sale. And when I saw the sale sign, I had to get it. It's just the nature of things, right? I've been thinking of this meat food processor, and I went to this garage sale by accident. I saw, oh my goodness, they're actually selling a fruit processor, a good one. It's from 2012, and they're selling it for $10. I have to have that. Like Crystal says, it if it's on sale, I have to buy 4. And I'm gonna put all my business out there now. Have you ever gone into Bed and Body Works and they tell you if you buy 3, you get the 4th one free? How many of you have walked away buying one? Come on now, be honest now. This is truth-telling time, right? BBW has the deals, and you smell that Japanese blossom, and you're like, oh my God, I have to have all of them. I mean, the correct. Okay, Earl, you're letting things out here. But I'm just talking about a sale. Sometimes a sale can snatch your soul and snatch your consciousness. And before you know it, you're a slave to it in a moment. Happens to the best of us. It's just the nature of things. Off-balance relationship favoring what feels good versus what is good, right? It feels good to buy those 4 moisturizing cream, even though I have 14 others that I haven't opened yet. Because this one is for spring, and that one is for summer, and the other one is for winter. And I can't be, I can't use the same moisturizer for all these seasons. Come on now. What's wrong with you? Nobody wants to show up ashy. You want to be fabulous when you show up. So you need those 4. In case the other 3 doesn't work, the 4th one may just do the trick. It's the nature we reason, it's how we reason to ourselves to make things feel good, knowing fully well it may not be good. Becoming too dependent, immediate rewards, and focus on long-term needs. When you think of, what do I feel in this moment? I want to get this stuff. It's going to make me feel good. I've had a lousy day, and I happen along just serendipitously to be at JCPenney's, and they have a sale on all those mindfulness items, right? In that little section. That's just it's just perfect. Some power greater than myself is looking upon me and says, Earl, you need to buy some items and get your yoga on because you had a tough week. So now you have 4 yoga mats, right? 5 diffusers, but you're feeling good because you're like, I'm going to get my chi back. I'm going to middle myself and ground myself. I just have to start the yoga, but it's all right. If I got all the equipment, I'm going to be motivated to start sometime this decade. Just the nature of how we make ourselves think through things. 8 different insulated water bottles. Absolutely. Who has 1 water bottle? Come on. You have the one with a straw, you have the one without the straw, you have the one with the insulated stuff, the one that you possibly can get both cold and hot items, even though you've never put coffee in it, but it's all right. It can. And that's what's important, right? How many of you bought a thermos for soup and haven't had soup in like a year? Because the thermos was on sale at Marshall's. Come on. You know you bought that thermos and it was pink, so you had to match it with your outfit. It's just the nature of things. I think I've got about 3 or 4 different water bottles for my bike that I have ridden like once this year. But water bottles are fabulous. It matches the tire, it matches the stuff. I have to get 1 for the tire, 1 for the fender. In case, I have my outfit that matches these are all the things that we talk about. None of that sounded insane, did it? But if I keep doing that, I will end up in a problem. So that's how it starts. Having good intentions. Starbucks reusable cup. Come on. Or you just go buy the coffee to get the Christmas cup, right? Because there's only one. You have to have. Everybody else in your community has one. How dare you not have one? Or a pile of books I'm going to read. Yes. How many of us have 4 DSM-5 versions? Come on, be real about it. Or all those, self-help book that you're going to read. Or the counseling magazines. Or the social works. Oh, come on, you have them there. You're going to get to them eventually. They just don't understand how busy you are right now. So it's important to not be focused on the short-term rewards without looking at the long-term ramifications. What we find, though, is that in many instances, people who have been exposed to violence or significant trauma can also have major issues with trusting that something is going to be there, possessions in particular. You're in a situation where you perpetually feel at risk of being homeless. The likelihood is you're going to hold on to stuff, keep your possessions close, always think that you cannot, put things away because there's a likelihood that your situation can change in the flicker of an eye. So those are some elements as well. So we talked about the 5 major, and here is certainly an assessment tool that we often use in terms of the short-term payoffs. And you have to be very careful with this because people get very, very emotional when you talk to them about short-term payoff. I always say introduce the short-term payoff by being as forthright as you can about how you have fallen prey to it. Because there's nothing like telling people, I've experienced this. It may not be to the same magnitude, but I'm not walking in here like I'm free of, flaws, and I'm expecting you to somehow jump into this corrective action because, after all, I am all things knowing and you are all things needing. So why don't we just match up? You just do exactly what I say and everything will be fine. Never works. Short-term payoffs, it's a good deal. It just may not be good for you. That's what we remind ourselves. It's good, it doesn't mean it's good for you. And the long-term ramifications may be great. So we have to look at it from that sense. But these particular assessment tools are great because they take away that burden of feeling that you have to be the authority, you have to be that person can actually gain some insight by experiencing that for themselves. Even if it raises the question, it may not result in change action, but it may result in the first time that person questions, is my home really cluttered? Am I really collecting stuff because I have a warped way of connecting with items? Holding on to everything that I'm given is not a way of holding on to the people or to the relationship. There's ways of doing that. Instead of holding on to the dresser to the niece that I haven't spoken to in 15 years, maybe picking up the phone and calling her actually makes a connection that a dresser can't make. So think of some of these that I'm hoping that you'd want to try all of these assessment tools, but just think of the one that is the most immediate that you can actually use for a person who's experienced a particular or facing a particular bad guy, right? If that person is the person who wants to figure out all these magnificent, phenomenal ways of categorizing their stuff, you may want to take a look at helping that person really use one tool. Do you overthink? Can you really assess your way of thinking about categorizing stuff? Because oftentimes, if one area gets that spark, you're able to move into other areas to really take a conscientious look at the comprehensive problem that a person may be experiencing. So the lesson here is they are bad guys. There are ways of thinking that impedes people's progress. It stems from good intentions and oftentimes the most innocent kind of approach, but they kind of build on each other or they can gain momentum and before you know it, it's out of control. It doesn't mean it can't be stymied or really pulled back. It easily can. It just needs that person to really look at their way of thinking and understand how it impacts and influences their feelings and their behaviors and how they may be responding to a need through possessions or their relationship with that possession. So I want you to take a moment, if you can, to do the evaluation, because as fabulous as I think I am, and I'm just being facetious, it's important that this particular trend, this information gets to you in the way that makes sense. It's applicable. You can see immediate benefits of doing it, and you're able to really gauge a benefit from utilizing this information, the tools, and really providing some feedback as we come as to how things went, because we all want to know. Nobody wants to remake the wheel. If Sydney has done something that has worked fabulously, we want to get a sense that maybe I can try that and see if it's going to work for Christina, right? Because nobody has the magic wand, unfortunately. I'm sorry. Whoever thought so, I'm sorry for disappointing you. Even if you have the magic wand, it's a little rusty. You may have to get some tools to kind of get it back on its path. But take a moment, provide us with some feedback as to how things have gone. Are we, is the information we provided in a way that's palatable to you? Is it making sense? Can we do things differently? Can we provide less information? Can we do more information? Earl, I need to hear less from you. I need to see more slides. Whatever works. I want to make sure that this is meeting your needs in a way that allows you to really help the people who need you the most. And as is the normal pattern of things, we will be asking you to use some of these tools and provide us some feedback. So the learning application for April is to try to assess for the bad guys using one of the tools. What I suggest is that you can certainly use it with the consumer and also give the consumer to actually do that self-assessment and provide you feedback. And that may help in that tool process of doing so. Hopefully you'll be able to provide us feedback in terms of how it went, what was helpful, what was challenging. Our next meeting is in May on the 23rd at the same time, using the same link. I was able to get the same link, so hoping that we see all of you back there. You're already registered. You don't have to start from scratch, but I certainly want to get a sense from you as to how that is. And I have a message here from Michelle. Thank you for the information. This meeting, unfortunately, I have to, okay, absolutely. But the links and information will also, the presentation and the recording will be shared with you by the DBHR. Otherwise, we will bring that information to you in April, so you'll have that information. But thank you very much. We appreciate your time and attention. We know takes a lot of your days to do this. I'm hopeful that this information provides you with another tool in your toolkit to help you really help people who have major challenges with hoarding behaviors. Don't forget to check out all things community supports using the newsletter, and FCS information is always available to you. Thank you very much for your participation, your engagement. I hope that your week goes well. I hope that you're able to really make some inroads into the people you're working with hoarding disorder, and help them enhance their insight or take action to really gain control of their behaviors. But in so doing, I want to respect your time. I'm going to end the recording and thank you once again and wish you the very best moving forward. Take good care. Hope to see you all next month. Have a good one.